You know what's holding you back. I know what's holding you back. But do you have the courage to face it? Because the truth is, you're afraid to be honest with yourself. In today's career conversation, let's talk about self honesty. And in the next two videos, I'm going to make this a series. We're going to talk about your weaknesses and your blind spots, both of which are part of your journey to get honest with yourself about yourself. And look, if you watch these videos or follow me on social, you absolutely know I believe that you must know your value and what you bring to the table that no one else can. But the other side of that is knowing if you're holding yourself back from that table and if you're keeping yourself from reaching the level of success that you desire. So, are you ready to talk about self honesty today and getting gut honest with yourself? Pull up your chair and let's get started. All of us, and I do mean all of us, have weaknesses. All of us have strengths. All of us have strengths. All of us have weaknesses. All of us have blind spots. But here's the important piece: self honesty compels you to confront part of your personality that you don't want to deal with. And it's a huge disservice to yourself not to take time for honest self reflection. You see, I'm often asked, what is the H in pull up your chair? And I respond, the H is for honesty. Because the essence of pull up your chair is self leadership. And if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others. It starts with you. And leading yourself starts with being honest with yourself about yourself. And that is the important piece of this conversation today because it's going to confront you to deal with something that we all have, and that's self deception. And self deception is the inability to see that we have a problem or weakness. Self deception is the idea that you think you're perceived one way, but you're actually perceived another way. And someone else's perception of you is exactly their reality of how they see you, which is why being honest means that you must confront your own self deception, your blind spots, your weaknesses, and put a plan in place to deal with them and, quite frankly, minimize and diffuse them so that they're not undermining your credibility. But for now, you must start with honest self reflection because if you're honest, I mean, truly gut honest, then you'll realize you have a choice. You can be your own best champion, as we've always talked about, or you can be your worst enemy. You might be holding yourself back and not realizing it. That's why getting gut honest with yourself about yourself is so critically important. None of us want to admit we have shortcomings or faults. None of us want to hold ourselves back. But in essence and in truth, if you're not doing the hard work of self reflection, and this is not a one and done, this is constant. If you're not doing the work of honest self reflection about how you are perceived by others, about that self deception that you think you come across one way and in fact you come across something else, then you are in fact doing yourself a huge disservice. Now, if you Google some of these topics, self honesty, weaknesses, blind spots, you'll find that most of the research comes in the form of leaders and what leaders should do. Well, I'm here to tell you this morning this is not just about being a leader, this is you lead yourself. And I believe getting honest with yourself and your self reflection starts with you, regardless of your title, regardless of your position in a company, regardless of what path you're seeking on your career journey. This is about your personal journey as well. And it is so critically important that you take the time for self honesty and self reflection because if you're holding yourself back, as I said, then we want to work together to put together a plan to minimize and diffuse the weaknesses and blind spots that may be preventing you from reaching the goals that you desire. And look, in my coaching program weekly, we've spent 8 weeks 8 weeks going through getting gut honest with ourselves. And we've gone through all of our weaknesses and all of our blind spots, and now how we minimize and diffuse them so that we're not undermining our own credibility. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. You don't want to undermine yourself or hold yourself back. That's why the true work, the hard work of honest self reflection, gut honest self reflection, is so necessary and a must do part of your professional journey. I'm going to get to the comments that I see coming in. I see we have a few folks joining us both on YouTube and LinkedIn. And don't forget, if you're on YouTube, click the subscribe button so that you're notified every time I do a video, live or upload. And hey, I see we have some folks on LinkedIn, so please send me a connection and follow request as well. So Chris Prouty says, woo, Chris, that is a big comment. Let me just scale that down so folks can see that right here on the screen. All right, what I've learned from you is that the first step to being honest is being honest with yourself. It's easy to be in denial about shortcomings, but the only way to grow is to face them head on. Chris, it's a tough lesson that we all have to learn in our careers. If you think of moments where you've gotten feedback, whether that was a 360 review or some annual review, or even just moments in conversation, you've gotten pieces of feedback you may not actually want to acknowledge because they can be tough pieces of feedback, critical feedback. But in those pieces of critical feedback lie nuggets of truth that we have to kind of look at and take them for what they are, which is, I have some areas for improvement. You have some areas for improvement. And be grateful that someone pointed them out to you, even though it's hard to do in that moment. So I completely agree with you. And then, yes, once you have a clear understanding of your weaknesses, you can begin and take steps to improve them. Chris, you're right. It is a difficult and challenging process, but you'll never level up to your full potential until you deal with your weaknesses and blind spots. And this is literally as simple as grabbing a piece of paper, left hand side column, put all your weaknesses. Right hand side, put your blind spots. By writing them down, that is part of the acknowledgement process. And then, yes, the next step is to actually minimize and diffuse them. And I'll get into that in the next two videos of this series where I talk about your weaknesses and your blind spots. So, what are your weaknesses? What are your blind spots? And then, how do you minimize and diffuse them? Because the formula here that I think Chris is touching on, that I'm now coaching my clients through, is you acknowledge and then you minimize and you diffuse. Because, and you'll hear me go into this more in the next video, if you let someone take away your power, and they can do that by pointing out your weaknesses and your blind spots, you're giving that power away. Why not minimize and diffuse those areas for improvement so that no one can use them against you? Unfortunately, that happens, as we all know. And so that's why we want to tackle this head on and do it on our terms so that we can be where we want to be without someone else taking that power away. Cicely, what is the best environment or conditions for one to engage in honest self reflection? Chris, my recommendation, my perspective is, quite frankly, you need a couple hours by yourself. This needs to be a distraction free exercise to start. And I say to start because if you're truly serious about your professional journey, even your personal journey in this life, then self reflection is not a one and done exercise. It's constant because you're constantly learning new things about yourself as you have new experiences. But, Chris, to start, the best environment is to be alone by yourself. Go grab a cup of coffee in a coffee shop. Go somewhere where you can truly just be with your thoughts and start that list that we just talked about, Chris. So that is a great question. Another Chris Rivera, thanks for being here this morning. How do you become aware of your blind spots? Do you ask people whom you know and who you trust to give you honest feedback? Chris, we have Chris Prouty and Chris Rivera this morning. So, Chris Rivera, there are actually a number of ways to identify your blind spots. There's actually 4 or 5 different ways to identify your blind spots. I'm going to get into those in the next video when we talk about weaknesses next Monday, and then next Thursday when we talk about blind spots. But let me say for now, yes, if you have, as we talked about last week, and some of my clients started laughing, a blind spot buddy, if you have someone who you can get honest feedback from, then absolutely that is one source of information, but there are certainly others. The idea here, though, is it needs to be unbiased information, someone you trust if you decide to go down that road. But Chris Rivera, this honestly can be done without seeking feedback from someone else because, and I always coach my clients, where are those 360 reviews, those annual reviews, where are those emails that talk about things you could do differently? They come up in everyday conversation. We just choose not to acknowledge them. One of the key pieces here is that if you choose not to seek out someone to speak to, then sit down. I will tell you, Chris Rivera, when I started this process in our coaching program, I started with my list. My list was so long on both sides, I actually couldn't fit it on one slide because I have taken 25 plus years of people pointing out my weaknesses and blind spots to me, but also acknowledging them for myself. So, yes, you can absolutely speak to someone, but if you honest gut self reflection, you may also know what these are already. You just tended not to deal with them because it is a challenging process. So, as you think of the questions that Chris Prouty's asked today, Chris Rivera has asked, you can see that at its very core, it does start with you. It's all about self honesty and self reflection. So, I challenge you today, and in the next two videos, as we talk about your weaknesses and your blind spots, I'm going to challenge you. Pull out that piece of paper, find that quiet environment, and start your weaknesses and your blind spots. Now, if you don't know what the difference is between the two, then I will address that in the next video very soon. So we're going to define weaknesses, we're going to define blind spots, and then we're going to talk about how to minimize and diffuse each one of those. But for now, you've just got to make the mindset shift that you're ready to get honest with yourself. And it is a mindset shift because it's hard. Nobody wants to do the hard work. Look, I am the worst, and maybe you are too. No one wants to admit we have shortcomings and faults. But start there, start with you, and then we'll get into even harder work of our self reflection journey together over these next couple of videos. Listen, if you are still with me, thanks for hanging in there with me. I appreciate you watching today. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can literally click on this picture and subscribe. I'm also going to link to some additional training just so you have that for your benefit as well. I look forward to seeing you in the next training where we're going to do a deeper dive into your weaknesses and your blind spots.